Hello everyone, this is update for February 27, 2023, day 369 of the war and of the date update. So a little bit of strategic news and events, and then we're going to switch to Ukraine. So first of all, U.S. sanctioned I think 5 Chinese companies for supplying non-lethal equipment to Russian army. Um, I think this doesn't honestly doesn't change anything because those companies were kind of like a shells. So those shells will be sort of discarded, and I'm sure that Chinese government will set up new shells that will be doing that. So this is sort of like second nature to the any communist regime. So they as I said, it has its origins in mafia. So they this is not gonna sort of change anything or disrupt anything by any means. Um, the big question is, as I said before, are shells. What's going on with that is probably is going to be, in a way, kind of like a final solution to a situation, at least in Donbass. Not sure about the sort of from a really big picture, but that's something that can change the scale in Russian favor if they get it, because they, as I mentioned before, they are on a very strict diet, and the diet is becoming more and more stricter. And if this continues, the ability to advance will probably be sort of close to impossible for Russian army. Anyways, going back to China, then U.S. reconnaissance airplane flew between China and Taiwan, which obviously irritated China. Um, there are some desires from the U.S. administration and U.S. White House to talk to Chinese president, which uh, Chinese side is basically rejecting. So as you can see, both countries are firmly on the collision course, and this attempts to just kind of have a phone call, as if phone call will resolve very fundamental economic problems, is, I would say, strange and naive. Let's put this way. Um, so for China, it's very clear they are on the war path. So like what sort of U.S. did to China from a Chinese perspective, this is the beginning of the war. So this is only the question for China is how to respond in the safest way for now. Um, for now, there are still economic benefits and there are still strategic consideration that outweigh outright confrontation. And by outright confrontation, I mean even sending the shells to Russia. So so far, they still sort of wearing the mask. When it will be thrown off is, well, we'll see. Definitely not right now. Not in March. Let's put this way. And remains to be seen how things will be developing. But it's clear that confrontation will be just intensifying over time. There is a lot of other news related to this, but at this point, I'm not even sort of going sort of discussing like sort of things like, oh, U.S. delegation went to Taiwan to determine what how to help them, or Taiwanese soldiers were sent to US for training, all of that stuff. At this point, those are, I would say, pretty irrelevant news. It's kind of like looking in the rear view mirror at this point. This is all sort of old stuff. The question is where things are going, sort of going forward. Uh, in terms of Russia and China, the cooperation is intensifying. China is buying tons of coal from Russia. This starting from the new year, from in basically January, February of 2023, like record numbers amounts of coal. Um, Russia is getting cars from China, but sort of curious part about it that because there is a lot of discussion, or China is becoming really huge automaker and becoming like number one in the world. The only reason it's number one in the world is because it has um, German automakers there. If they were go away from there, China will go back to pretty much nothing because Chinese, like truly Chinese design made cars, they're not popular, very subpar quality, and um, they are basically it's not what Japan was in the 50s, in early 60s, like the Japanese cars. By that I mean, and then what the same path repeated by Korea, South Korea. By that I mean, so they're not going to be able to do the same thing so far because um, culturally, quality is not as important in China, and and for the cars, quality is paramount. It's like a must. And for that reason, it might be bridged too far for Chinese. Especially, this requires mass manufacturing. If it were like sort of small numbers, small batches, that might be achievable. But in the large scale industrial production, this is they still sort of light years away. Even they do make some cars. So what China does is it's basically selling German cars that are made in China to Russia. And Volkswagen, in this example, Volkswagen is one of the largest investors, auto manufacturers in China, and so it's trying to clamp down on that activity. But as you can imagine, it's nearly impossible. So that all of that export of the cars, of basically Western cars, to Russia will continue and not going to stop. Another source is United Arab Emirates. That's where, and another sort of river of cars that's going to Russia. So again, as you can see, the ability to stop flow of consumer goods that are popular that may upset, absence of which may upset Russians, is definitely not going to get stopped. The problem is that the prices are going up because it's all kind of like smuggling, so you need to pay extra to the smuggler, and so it's not it's not the regular price, it's extra 20-30%, and all for the same reason the prices for auto parts, for repair parts for the Western cars in Russia also about like 40 or 50% up, which again reduces quality of standard of life overall in Russia. In terms of like electronics, for example, very interesting example, Russia is importing a lot of iPhones from India now. So if you remember, Apple is trying to shift to India from China due to confrontation, and now the flow of now sort of Russia, mostly importing from India, basically. Again, the same idea where you really cannot control the flow of that equipment, and the same is true for computers. They are mostly coming from like places like Hong Kong, Indonesia, and so on. So again, the ability to stop the flow of all of that is extremely sort of probability is very low. Um, so now, actually, let's switch to situation here in on the Dniester River. So basically, there is a Dniester River that actually I didn't show here, but there's a river that separates this part that I highlighted, and it's called Pridnestrovia, from Moldova. And this region um, basically was controlled by Russia from 1991, from basically from the fall of the Soviet Union. There is a large ammunition depot with tons of shells. One of the huge one, let's put it this way, here in the northern part of it. Um, and there is, it seems like that the tension continued to sort of build up in this area. There are about like 2,000 Russian troops in the whole of this Prednistrovia region. There's sort of internal troops there. That's another, I don't know, 5 to 7,000. Uh, and so it looks like there might be something happening here because uh, a very popular Hungarian airline called Wizz Air, which essentially dominates um, air passenger traffic in, let's say, Ukraine, Moldova, some probably other countries, or it used to at least before the war. It's stopping its flights from Moldova starting, I believe, March 11 or March 14. As you can imagine, very unusual move. Then there were spotted Romanian gepards moving to the border with Moldova. There is buildup of Ukrainian troops in this area. So um, it's kind of like a situation where everything is ready, you just need to pull the trigger. Where it's going to be pulled or not remains to be seen. Um, I would say if it makes sense from Ukraine, basically from the West perspective at this point, from Moldova, Romania, Ukraine perspective, it makes total sense. It would be excellent move by Ukraine by basically taking control of this area, and by that I don't mean annexation of this area, but what I mean is taking control of that ammunition depot and basically removing Russian troops from there. There's no question this is Moldova territory, even though technically it's not. Ethnic majority there is actually um, mostly Ukrainian, but this is going back to all of this whole conversation of, okay, we need to respect the borders the way they were drawn, or there will be basically World War III. And so, even though technically this is old Ukrainian territory, but it's part of the Moldova, so there's no question. But military operation makes a lot of sense there from Ukrainian perspective. So, as I said, there's increasing probability that might happen there. Then I will switch a little bit to Belarus. Belarus president um, made a statement where he said that Ukraine should uh, unconditionally basically surrender. He didn't say that, but what he said, or Ukraine should sign peace agreement with Russia immediately, without asking for any, accepting any terms that Russia offers, which means unconditional surrender. That is very interesting sort of move because he's basically, part of Russia, and he's a talking head for Russia, where they allow him to be sort of more aggressive. So in a way, as mentioned before, it's similar situation to North Korea and China. So the same idea, Russia and Belarus. He's allowed to speak what, let's say, Russian political top would not say, basically. This is obviously, it's even unclear why he makes such statements because Ukraine will not accept such terms for sure. So now let's switch to the situation, to military situation. In terms of just quick update on the military power grid, everything is okay for now. There is power. I mentioned Ukraine was able to restore power to consumers, not largely to the businesses. That part is dead, but at least consumers have electricity in a normal way. You know, but it is going back to the business. The economy is dead. I mentioned this many times before. I started talking about that probably in April of 2022. So at this point, it's more or less officially dead. The curious situation is that exchange rate Ukrainian hryvnia to US dollar, Ukrainian hryvnia actually strengthened. It was touching like 41, 42 at the sort of worst period. And then right now it's actually went to like 39, even slightly under 39, like 38.9, 38.8. So what's happening is that Ukraine got so much US dollars and euros from the West that it's sort of flush with, I wouldn't say cash because it's not really cash, but with these funds. And that even into the point that it actually pressures the exchange rate to make Ukrainian hryvnia stronger. Again, this is not due to natural strengths; it's just more like a curiosity, where it's totally dependent on the flow of financial aid from the West, basically. Now I'll actually do the walks through the front line. So we're gonna do it in a clockwise fashion, starting from very north. So the situation along the state border is, I would say, elevated. There is a lot of exchange of artillery fire in this area, where basically between Sumy and Kharkiv, in this area. I mentioned this before about like 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago, that there was again some strange activity here. So it's sort of coming back. Remains to be seen what comes out of it, but I just want to mention that there is something sort of brewing in this area, and whether it's from Ukrainian side or from Russian side is again don't have enough information to sort of to share. Now let's jump to the North Lugansk front line. Things here are more or less the same. Futile Russian attacks, they don't go anywhere. So far, everything is in balance, but the initiative is firmly in the Russian hands. There's no question about it. Whether this part of the front line is going to be selected as sort of decisive section of where the Russia decides to kind of like do some kind of offensive remains to be seen. I think probability is fairly low. And as I mentioned before, since now it's becoming very clear that Russian army is on a strict shell diet, the chances of that offensive again going somewhat down overall. Now let's move to North Donbass front line, where things are, I would say, pretty well. I would say very bad for Ukrainian side. So what's happening here is that Wagner mercenaries, they kind of like spreading in this area, and I'll show on the more detailed map around this artificial lake that's near Berhivka. There is a dam there, so in Berhivka. So they are spreading in this area, and situation is if I would say in a nutshell, it's agony of the Ukrainian defense in Bahmut. At the same time, the other important development observation here is that Wagner group is also exhausted. It's not exhausted to the point that it stops, because they basically see that this carrot right in front of their nose, that they can achieve this, and so they pushing themselves very hard to kind of like to push it to the finish line. but at the same time, they are as well exhausted. And part of the reason they are exhausted is because they cannot recruit from prisons anymore. And I spoke before about this shell hunger. So that problem is resolved at the expense of the regular Russian army. But the um, human material hunger or cannon fodder hunger has not been resolved. And it's very interesting. What happened is the reason that they are not allowed to recruit from the prisons anymore, because actually a regular Russian army decided to do that. So they decided to replicate Wagner group inside of the Russian army, and it's a much smaller scale. It's a battalion size. It's fighting on the central Donbass front line. I'll show the place. So they created this copy of Wagner group, and they are recruiting these prisoners into that. And so, they don't need competitors, so they shut off that flow to the Wagner group. So again, they are going back to the whole situation with the Wagner group. Once they probably will still manage to capture Bahmut. I would say 98% probability. But then after that, they will grind to the halt. Not because of they not capable of doing it, but because of they don't have resources with which, because they consume a lot of resources. It's very sort of resource intensive organization, and they basically, because I'm pretty sure once they achieve Bakhmut, they will also get fewer shells, because the regular Russian army also wants to do other operations. They will try to pool these scarce resources to themselves, and so this will be like, okay, you achieved this, now let give us a chance to achieve something else. And so just even from that perspective, there will be probably some kind of like operational break here, no matter what, for because they will need to accumulate this artillery shells, and they will need more recruits, which they trying to get now, not from prisons, but you know people in Russia understand that this is very, as I said, mid grinder, and it's a you becoming cannon fodder. I mean, it sounds very like glorious. It's glorified in Russia, but at the same time, people understand that the chances of dying there are extremely high. So the number of recruits is the pool of recruits is extremely limited. But now let's look in a little bit more detail where everything stands. So, as I said, Wagner mercenaries, they, mentioned before, they captured this village Berhivka and Yagidne, right? Those two villages. This forced Ukrainian troops to withdraw from this part of Bahmut that I'm showing. That's essentially east of this railroad that's here. And so there's a new front line here. At the same time, Wagner Group is sort of spreading and gaining more control between this artificial lake and Yagidne. So they gain, more territory here. So as you can see, the the situation here for Ukrainian side is getting worse by day, and that's why I said it's agony. How long it's gonna last, nobody knows really, but it's definitely not long. Let's put it this way. Um, the main road, as you can see, is threatened for sure. Probably already at some under some artillery control. So you need to use basically field roads, which is not, and drive in at night. So that's the only way to basically at this point um, to supply Ukrainian troops in Bakhmut. Um, in terms of, because there are some basically Russian propaganda resources saying there's encirclement here. There's no encirclement here, um, but this is probably time to pull the trigger on pulling Ukrainian troops out of Bahmut, in order not to lose equipment when you retreat. Let's put it this way, because if you're retreating in sort of semi-panic mode, the things that are getting lost is heavy equipment. It's the first thing that will be dropped, and and that's obviously something that Ukrainian army is lacking, um, very badly. So it would be the worst thing that could happen. Obviously, the worst thing is people, but I would say people probably will be able to exit. It's just a question of the equipment, because as you can see, there is still tiny bridgehead of Ukrainian army on the eastern side of this Bakhmutka river that goes through this town. There is also reports that there are severe shortages of ammunition for Ukrainian defenders. So, for example, mortar mines, all calibers, 120, 82, 60, totally, I would say, on a starvation diet for Ukrainian side. Even handheld rocket launchers also like lacking. So essentially, at this point, what most defenders have is essentially their AKs and machine guns. That's pretty much for the most part. I'm not saying that like totally nothing, but like it's completely like there is definitely, as a whole, or as from a statistical perspective, as an average, there is definitely not enough, and that's probably first signs that the supplies are breaking to Ukrainian defenders in Bakhmut, and that's obviously the reason to withdraw, because Ukrainians' ability to push back on Wagner Group is non-existent. And by the way, there was some attempt to counterattack from this village. I think it's Rihova Dubivka, something like that, in this direction, and it failed. And as I mentioned before, as an organization, Wagner Group is superior to Ukrainian army, and far superior. And so it will beat Ukrainian army at pretty much any moment, any time, because of the superiority of organization. Uh, Again, this and because there's another factor that starts to really play on the Ukrainian side is the quality of the replacement that comes to the front line is dropping significantly, and in by that I mean motivation. Um, so if they push hard, many of them are retreating. They're not prepared to sort of die to plug with their bodies the front line, which I think is a right on a personal level. It's a right decision for everyone, for the people who choose to do so, because if you don't have support, as I mentioned, you don't have artillery support, you don't have mortar support, you don't have enough of those handheld rockets, you're becoming also cannon fodder, and they you're not cannon fodder, let's put this way. So because of that, that's why Wagner mercenaries managed to basically create this whole like salient in the northern sector of Bakhmut. The reason the southern is holding on much better is because there is this third brigade, which is attempt of in sort of reincarnation of Azov. It's a poor copy of Azov, but still it has higher fighting spirit on average among the among its soldiers. So basically, they're willing to plug the hole with their bodies. So that's why the southern shoulder is still holding on. But this is again goes back to the point that, like, okay, you have that attrition of these people who are really the best people, who are really backbone of your army, and you're losing them. And eventually, once you lose them, the ability to replace them is minimal. So then you're going to be having the same situation what's happening in the northern sector here, where the units are pushed hard, they just retreat. Um, and so again, strategically, this is big strategic problem for Ukrainian military command and for Ukraine as a whole. That ability to abuse, um, human resources is probably gone. The it needs the Ukrainian sort of Ukraine as a system, as a society, needs to change that, because it doesn't have the resources to abuse, and they're running out of the resources to abuse. And so you need to change. You need to switch to quality, not the quantity. And within the current Ukrainian political top and military top, that's simply impossible. They just don't have a level of intelligence to do that. It's just bridged too far for them. So for that reason, the there is high chance that things will be developing in quite negative direction for Ukraine. We'll see what happens with Wagner Group. As I said, there's a lot of unknowns there as well. They are exhausted at this point as well. Um, they will still score this goal probably with Bahmut, but once they score, they will be extremely exhausted. As I said, they drained of people as well, and they about to be drained of the shells, the same as they had about a week ago or so. So again, their offensive potential will be severely diminished as well, and so that may sort of balance for some time the situation. But then again, we have this question of China, which is again big unknown. Are they willing to supply shells to Russia? If they are, then the situation will be extremely bad for Ukraine. Let's put it this way. If you don't change military top and don't make changes to switch to quality as opposed to quantity. So hopefully this helps to kind of like understand. Now let's actually a little bit kind of see how things. So this was 25th. So just kind of to show you. So as you can see, this is where they are spreading into here in this area, basically coming closer to this road, essentially this area. So this was 25th, and this was on 23rd. So as you can see, things are deteriorating in the most dangerous sort of direction, right? Because this is the supply road, and obviously for that reason, Wagner mercenaries they focused on this very narrow area to basically get as close to this supply lines and cut them as soon as possible, because they totally understand that will cause collapse of the defenses in Bahmut itself. So this was how it used to be on the 13th. So as you can see, this is this initial blow, which the loss of this with the Paraskovivka, I think, was the key. So this was the key stronghold. Once it being lost, the rest, this whole northern sector started to really collapse pretty quickly. Now this is just a kind of like a bigger picture of the same. So as you can see, the situation is difficult for Ukrainian side, and there's no question there's need to be withdrawal. And as I said before, the most likely withdrawal position is going to be this along this freshwater channel that I'm showing here. Now let's switch to the central Donbass front line. Things here are more or less the same. Regular Russian military attacking Ukrainian and losing, not achieving pretty much anything and losing tons of resources. So going back to this battalion that they formed It's called Somali, probably after the country Somali. And so, as far as I know, it operates here in this Piski salient or Avdiivka, basically in this sector here. They are based. The problem is that uh, they in a way kind of like copied mechanistically what Wagner Group does, but they didn't copy the whole idea of common sense and empowerment of um, the soldiers, and so it doesn't work. It just creates tons of casualties, and they don't achieve anything. Basically, bureaucracy kills anything. You cannot just take the successful um, idea and keep the bureaucracy there. It doesn't work. So basically, that's just again waste of resources. So now a little bit want to mention about Vuhledar. So the losses there are heavy. So now Russian command brought in the 5th Tank Brigade. So now it's basically destroying 5th Tank Brigade because, as I mentioned before, they basically destroyed 155th Naval Infantry Brigade, severely damaged 40th, the 14th here Special Forces Brigade. But this is really tiny unit. It's usually it's around like 700, slightly more than 1,000 soldiers. So this is you know different. But now they basically successfully destroying 5th Tank Brigade, uh, which is considered one of the better ones in the Russian army. And so the way it goes, they will be successful at destroying. I mean, the Russian military command will be successful destroying 5th Tank Brigade, was achieving pretty much nothing there. Um, Now let's just quickly check Zaporizhya front line. Things here are basically stalemate, exchange of artillery fire, but no new attempts by other side to do something here at this point. And as I said, the chances of Russian offensive now went down significantly because of all of this shortages of ammunition. I'm sure that they probably trying to accumulate more ammunition, basically the same as the Soviet army was doing during World War II, where they basically essentially use almost no ammunition for, let's say, the time before the offensive to accumulate, and then they would do like strong burst uh, for a short period of time, use that all up, but that will allow to create a breach in German defenses, and then they will flood, and that's how they basically operated at that time. So they current Russian command may try to do that. Remains to be seen if they're going to be successful, but so far it looks like all of those scarce resources, all of that inventory has been channeled to Wagner Group to allow them uh, to finish their job and capture Bahmut. That's it for today. Thanks for watching, and until next time, bye bye.